Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Miss Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. Author Brian McGill is quoted as saying, "Our children can be our greatest teachers if we are humble enough to receive their lessons." As a parent of a 3-year-old, I can attest that this is true, though I must also confess that I rarely possess enough humility to see the lesson my son is teaching, at least not in the moment. However, when I take a step back, I am confronted with the message that he's trying to communicate to me, whether it is to ask for my patience, my support, or to simply know that I love him just as he is at that moment. And then, like all of us, I learn and try to do better. Parenting a child at Alpine Valley School, or another school like ours, is not an easy task. In the first place, you have to free yourself from many of the restrictive paradigms that parents are tasked with from day one. In particular, the notion that you are the boss, the authority that must be respected at all costs and obeyed, and that is usually the first casualty in an AVS education. Kids who are given mastery over their day-to-day lives at school begin to expect it in other areas as well, and may start to push back against rules at home, questioning, for example, why they need a bedtime or why they need to eat their broccoli, to name just a few things. Friction at home can and does happen when students are exploring their freedom, and it's not always easy to handle from the other side of the dinner table. Not only are parents trying out a new alternative education for their children, but now they are being questioned as well. Not to worry, though. My guest on the show today, Connie Cook, says that it's all a positive experience. And she should know she's the mother of 3 children, all of them AVS graduates, and one of them who happens to be me. Yes, I have the joy of interviewing my own mom on this episode, the woman who I turn to when my own parenting struggles are overwhelming, as well as someone with no shortage of experience as an AVS staff member for many years. In many ways, she's been a second mom for dozens of kids and helped many families in their transition to our model of education. I suppose you can tell that I think a great deal of her, and I know you will too, as she shares her tips for trustful parenting and overcoming fear. Here's our conversation. Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you.
Would you start by, for everyone who's not your child, telling me your name and your history with the school and just kind of introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm Connie Cook. I am the registrar in several different positions at the school. We moved to Colorado so that the kids could attend Alpine Valley School many years ago. If the school's been around 20 years, we probably came when the school was about a year old. So we've been here about 19 years.
Great. So my memories of what life was like before AVS are one thing, but I want to hear your perspective. So what do you remember about kind of our family life before you found AVS?
Well, I do remember you being very stressed with homework, as well as some of the ways that the kids acted in a public school setting. As I remember, you were in 7th or 8th grade before we moved, and I really was wanting something different for you. Josh was also, the middle child, was also struggling a bit with saying, I know this stuff, why am I having to do this homework? And he and I were already kind of butting heads, and I didn't like it.
Yeah. So what prompted you to start looking for something different?
The preschool that both you and Joshua attended, Christy was too little and never went there, the founder passed along the Free at Last book from the Sudbury Valley School, as she really wanted to start a Sudbury school. And I was totally intrigued and felt totally aligned with it as soon as I read it. It just was not happening in Las Cruces. So that's when I talked to Scott and just said, let's see if we can make this happen. And he was totally on board.
That's great. And so you were just looking for any school in the vicinity?
Well, listen, there was nothing in New Mexico. The closest one was in Arizona, in the Phoenix area. And they never did really meet with me in person. We talked on the phone and ended up, they closed within a year or two. when I called the school in Colorado where we are, I spoke with Larry, who was totally passionate about the model. He and his wife had just had a brand new baby, and he made a point of meeting me there. And I knew when I looked into his eyes and saw the light of this passion, this is it. This is where we're going.
Yeah. So we picked up and moved. What was that like for you to just leave and go somewhere for no other reason than just this model of education?
I definitely didn't really want to leave some of the family and friends behind, but I also knew it was right. So I really, the positives very much outweighed the negatives in my mind.
Yeah. So what do you feel like changed for our family immediately after enrolling? Like, what was your first sense of like things are shifting?
Well, for one, you and Josh seemed very happy. I think I remember you at one point early on in your attendance saying something like, "This feels like home." Mm-hmm. And Josh, there weren't that many kids even around. I think there were like maybe 11 or 12. And he immediately made friends, and as did you. So, like I said, Christy was still not attending. She was young. But the two of you just seemed to be blossoming.
Did you notice any difference in how you were behaving, like how it affected your life?
Probably. I don't distinctly remember, other than it fit with the way that Scott and I parented anyway, for the most part, letting you make choices in your life as to when you went to bed and what you did with your time. So I don't remember huge changes other than just feeling so relieved that there wasn't the pressure of homework and other of the bullying and other things that went on at the schools that you and Josh attended previously.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you remember our home life changing beyond that in any other kind of way once we started at AVS?
Well, I think it was more relaxed. You used to stay in your room a lot when you were in public school. I think you just were suffering in silence at some level, and didn't really want us to interfere for fear there would be more repercussions. So you were more out with the family. You had more friends over and were engaged more in a social type activity from what I could see. I think Josh just kind of found his rhythm. He really enjoyed gaming. He's more of a person that enjoys being alone. And so I think he was still out about with the family, and he just seemed more joyous and more happy, which I think was probably easier on Christy, the youngest, as you guys were modeling being in school and yet enjoying yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely how I remember it too. Like just the clouds opened up and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So you said you're also a staff member at AVS, obviously, as I know, but you have been for a while now. And while we were still enrolled, or at least while Josh and Christy were still enrolled, how has that experience been for you of being both a parent to kids that are at the school and a staff member?
You know, I'm sure there would have been differences had I not been a staff member there for the three of you. But we never really bumped into each other in the sense of me having to see the three of you doing something that I wanted to run and hide from. I'm sure there were challenges at times. The judicial committee, all of you were in there at some point. I probably was as well. But I also made sure I never served when one of you was written up. I never served on the judicial committee. And I think it just flowed. We'd ride home together and talk about the day. And I really didn't pry into what you guys were doing. I wanted you to have your own experience as much as possible. So was it a pure Sudbury experience for you? Probably not. But for the most part, like I said, I tried to let you be and let you do your own thing as I did mine. And I was busy. There were things to learn for me as well. So I think it worked.
Yeah. Do you think because you were a staff member, you didn't necessarily have, I guess you probably did for a little while when we started and you weren't a staff member, but there's sort of a period sometimes, I think, when you're a new family, new parents that have just enrolled your kid where you're like, what are they doing all day? But you actually got to see that. Like you got to see what we were doing all day. Not that you were seeking it out, right? Or like stalking us or anything, but just you didn't necessarily have that question.
No, I really didn't. And it's funny because I think many parents have a great concern. And as I look back, and there were some days I wasn't there. At the beginning, I only volunteered. I was not a staff member. So when you and Josh were first starting, I was at home with Christy a lot. So I didn't really know what went on. As the years progressed and I actually became a staff member and all three of you were there, I just think what I noticed was just how much imagination unfolded. I can just remember you sharing and Josh sharing and Christy sharing some of the things that you did that were so creative and I think that have been a foundation for all three of you and what you've gone on to do with your lives. So that was great fun to see. Is I didn't feel like any particular adult or activity had a great deal to do with that. It's something that just came from within, and because you were allowed to create your day, it all just fell into place. And I think, yeah, there were hard times for sure, and there are learning opportunities, and those happened. And my heart hurt at times for the three of you when I would see things that obviously were uncomfortable, but they were stretching, and I trusted that. I trusted it for myself as well because it happened for me too. So, yeah, I think it was a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you've seen a lot of kids come through the school, and, we talked a little bit about like kind of one of the challenges that parents experience being trust in the beginning and like, what are my kids even doing? They just have so much freedom. But what would you say are some of the other major challenges that families face when kids first start at AVS?
Well, I'm sure as everybody has mentioned, gaming is one of them. It doesn't come up as much in our tours and admissions interviews as it used to, from my perspective. But still, when there are boys that are enrolling, and we do have a majority of boys right now, many of the moms and dads have some queries about that. How are they going to learn anything if all they're doing is gaming all day? So that's one of them, and I think it's something that it takes time. It's not something you're going to necessarily see the benefits for immediately. I think another thing is the boredom. Kids do move into a space of boredom. And I think when you're at a Sudbury school, that boredom is more from an inner perspective. It's not bored with the subject you're studying, not bored with the classes that you're taking. It's more of a place to kind of launch something new from. So you have to kind of be in that resting space where you don't quite want to do what you've been doing, but you don't quite know what you're going to be doing next. That's something we try to talk to parents about, because kids will go home and say, I'm bored. Well, that doesn't mean that they aren't doing anything. It may mean that they're more quiet on the outside, but that inner aliveness is brewing. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned the gaming question, which definitely, we still do get sometimes. And how do you approach that with families? That if somebody came to you and said, all my kid does all day is play video games, and I'm concerned about that, what advice would you give them?
It's going to take time. Be patient. Look more from a holistic point of view at your child. Are they happy? I mean, many parents, I think, are looking to see if they're becoming a zombie or if they're becoming withdrawn. And I think you'll see that most of the kids are thriving. It's a very interactive environment. They consult each other. They talk about strategies. They work together. They're one of the loudest groups in the school, is the tech room where all the computers are. You can be in the art room and people can be quietly working, maybe chatting with each other. You go in the tech room and there's a lot of noise because they're talking to each other and engaged in what they're doing and sharing ideas. So I'd say let it be for a while. Be patient. and just see the benefits from another perspective instead of looking for the zombification of your child. Look for that sparkle in their eye. Look for for Joshua, your brother, the middle child. He just became interested in philosophy because of some of the games that he played. So how would you guess that was going to happen? But some of them are very intricate and they have a great storyline, and these kids get involved in it. And they learn history and they can learn about physics, and there's many different things that come through those games that, we as adults that don't play them may have no idea what's going on and how much they're getting from them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. One of the things that I hear when sometimes after people start is the kids are coming home after school and now pushing back or questioning the rules at home and saying, why do I have a bedtime? Why do I have to eat vegetables? Whatever it is, it's not always those things, but and that can be a real challenge if you've had, potentially a fairly harmonious family life. And now your kids are coming home and saying, demanding an explanation for kind of the parenting role. Have you seen that? And if so, like, what do you think, how do parents approach that?
I definitely have seen it. I've seen it with my three. I've talked to parents about it. I've definitely seen it with some of the kids when they're with their parents. And I think it is one of the most exciting and beneficial things about the school. You just have to kind of step back and not react immediately out of them questioning your authority. That's going to be a challenge. And I have a story with Joshua. I would say he was probably 9. We'd been at the school maybe a couple of years. I'm not sure how long. We'd gone back to New Mexico to visit family. I was going to go have breakfast with a friend of mine. So I was giving the three of you the option of perhaps a donut or something for breakfast that morning. What did you want? And Josh said, I want a candy bar. And my first response was, well, that's not breakfast. Why would you want a candy bar? And he looked at me just straight in the eye, and he's like, Mom, a donut has sugar and fat, and a candy bar has sugar and fat. What's the difference? And I said, what kind of candy bar do you want? Because in the end, he's so right. Why? It's like this judgment that we hold about certain activities or certain ways of being. And I just love that they challenge that. Hooray. It's not easy. And you do have to find that space, or hopefully find that space within yourselves to give it room to let that breath of fresh air come forth, because it's a delight. You can really see that real person emerging. And I really hope that parents can trust in that process.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, that the donut story made you question, like, oh, well, why do I have this arbitrary designation that candy bars are not for breakfast, but donuts are? And I think that may be the part of the process that's kind of uncomfortable, is like, if kids are pushing back against your rules, you have to really say, oh my gosh, why do I have this rule? And sometimes the answer is, I don't know. Like, it's what my parents did. It's what society expects of me, perhaps. And when it's challenged, that can be kind of uncomfortable.
Oh, most definitely. It is going to require, like I said, I think that pause before you just blurt back out, because I said so. And it's like, well, for me, it's been a great opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, some introspection. What do I believe and why?
Yeah. And maybe letting go of because I said so.
Absolutely. Not imposing that just because it's the ready answer.
Yeah. Something else I want to bring up is sometimes when kids start here, they come back home with language that they weren't potentially using before, or maybe isn't used at home. Do you have any advice for families that might be struggling with that? Let's say with cursing, like they come home and now they're cursing because they're hearing it at school, and we don't, regulate that beyond it being, directed at somebody or being excessively vulgar. But if they've never used those words before and now they're coming home and they're using them, that again could be like another source of tension. That how would you help families deal with that?
But something I had to deal with as well, that I grew up where that just kind of was not allowed. Adults used it, but the kids were not allowed to use it. And my parents didn't use it much. But I remember getting my mouth washed out with soap once with my mom, which was so surprising because I think I said damn. So it was a bit of a shock to me when I came in and realized that the kids use all kinds of language. And that's just a part of them, I think, unraveling some of these constraints around words. So we're dealing with a lot of things freeing up our actions, our thoughts, and the words that play a part in that. So I really learned that unless they're directed at somebody, unless they're really being used in a vulgar and mean way, and if they're excessive, then yes, it needs to be a write-up, needs to be brought out and talked about, and definitely needs to see some change. But I really gotten over it. In fact, I sometimes don't even notice it anymore. So when we were at home, the kids, you guys are all pretty moderate about it. I didn't overhear a lot. Now, you might have been different with your friends, but I think when kids get that kind of freedom, they know when it's okay to use it and when it isn't. Maybe not to begin with, because I've heard stories from one mom where, it was a surprise to her and her family when her son just came out with all this. But he learned, and they were able to kind of laugh about it, and it was a wonderful moment together. So, it's going to take patience and maybe being a bit uncomfortable at times, and then setting your rules at home, or just knowing that they will adjust themselves to what's okay at home and out in public.
Yeah, it sounds like the theme is kind of relaxing that control that I think we're either we've learned over time or we're told we're supposed to have over our kids, but it's knowing that you're going to send your 5-year-old to this place where they can do whatever they want, and you really have to let go, it sounds like.
Well, that's what at some level, that is it. You don't have to let go of everything that you want to share with your child, in the sense of, or have them, be aware of what you would like and not like. But it's more on a level of equality than it is authority, so that you talk to your child. And I think most of them are so grateful to be at a school like this, and they realize that their parents are allowing that their parents are a big part of them being there, the major part of them being there, that they do honor that request. So yeah, it may be bumpy at times, but I think it's a workable situation, and one that will lead to you being closer to your child and having a wonderful relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know even if kids aren't grateful for it when they're 5 or 6, because they just don't think about it, boy, by the time I'd been here for a few weeks, I was like, thank you all the time, like that you took that leap, that you, not only that, but you like stuck it through when it might have been difficult, or that you had that patience to see how things unfolded. And boy, I'm still grateful for it every day. So along those lines, are there small changes that you would encourage, or not even that you would encourage, but just small changes that families could make to parent in a way that's complementary to this education? Because I think going to a school like AVS, at the end of the day, if you come home to a house that's rigid and full of rules, it can be jarring as a kid. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts around what it means to parent in a style that backs up this kinds of education rather than being in conflict with it.
Well, first of all, I would suggest that new parents, and maybe some that even have been there for a while, take a look at what fears are coming up in a different way, not necessarily expecting the child to change or do something so that the fears that you have as a parent can go away. Look at it more from a perspective of, what can I do as a parent to help support myself to move through these fears? Instead of, again, saying, you as my child need to do something more academic or project related or whatever, so my fears can go away. I'd say no, they're your fears, and you're capable of finding a way to deal with them. So we've got many resources. You can talk to other parents. We try to create an event at least once a month. Talk to the staff. Most of us have had kids there and for many years, and are happy to share with you what's happened for us. Listen to these podcasts. Read some of the books and articles that we suggest. There are ways to support yourself in being there for your child, because in the end, I really think for most families, it's going to be a huge benefit. So that's the first one. And secondly, I would say it's going to be as much of a difference or a learning opportunity, so to speak, for you as it is for your child, maybe even more so. That the parents stepping into this are being asked to trust in a process that seems counterintuitive to, or counterproductive, so to speak, to being a successful adult in the world. Oh, we need all these academics, and we need them to have projects, and we need them to have particular interests. See if you can find a way to look at that differently. See that, did you really benefit from all the classes you took, as most of us as adults have gone through the public school system? Are you using all of those things you learned? And can you just kind of rest in that space of how happy your child is or how much they've grown, and really listening to what they have to say? Maybe they aren't going to tell you about their day in detail, but can you just tune in on a different level and see really how much they're blossoming, how much happier they are, and how much benefit your whole family is getting from this?
That's great. Thank you. That's awesome. So my last question for you is if you have a favorite memory from school.
I can't think of a particular memory. It's just been some joyous times. I do have some memories of some of the dances that the kids put on. I think you doing it when you were younger, and Christy being involved with Ellie and putting on some dances, and just watching these kids. I can just remember when I was a young teenager and being so shy and quiet and just hesitant to step out of my shell. And these kids, whether they're introverts or extroverts, they love each other, and they just jump in with joy and whatever they want, whatever calls for in the moment, whether it's dancing or maybe singing a song. So that's something that not just at the dances, but almost every day brings me such gratitude to be there and watch these kids unfold and just see the light shine in their eyes and the happiness show up on their face. It's a real blessing.
Mm. Well, they're very lucky to have you here as well. And I'm super lucky to have you as my mom. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way.
And thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate your unique perspective. And I think you gave some great advice. So I really appreciate that.
You're most welcome.
Thanks to Connie for sharing her story with us here on the show. I want to highlight one particular piece of advice she gave, which was especially meaningful to me. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially she said, "It's not our kids' job to change in order to alleviate our fears. We have to do that work ourselves." Wow, that was a big aha moment for me. After our interview, I started paying attention to moments when fear arose for my own child. He's not eating enough fiber, or he's climbing too high on that jungle gym. And in those moments, I started to ask if I could simply trust him. I forced myself to breathe, to not intercede as I might normally have done. And wouldn't you know it, everything worked out all right. I know that won't always be the case, of course. Sometimes he will fail, and sometimes he will fall. And more than anything, what he needs from me in those moments is to be there for him, to support him and love him through disappointment and welcome him to try yet again. And I know that this approach works because it's exactly what my mom did for me. On this episode of the podcast, I'm rolling out a new feature for our listeners. It's called the Podcast Hotline, and it's a brand new voicemail box where you can call and leave your question, comment, or general skepticism to be featured in an upcoming episode of the show. I've gotten some comments from listeners saying that they'd like to be more involved in the show, and so this podcast hotline is a way to do just that. If you want to leave a message to be aired on a future episode of the show, simply call the following number, 720-580-3384, and record your question or comment. Once again, that number is 720-580-3384. Or if you want to send an audio file from your phone, please email the attachment to podcast@alpinevalley.school.com. Or you can simply type out your message the good old-fashioned way and send it to that email address as well. There are lots of ways to get in touch, and I want to hear from you. Special thanks to Luz Stanbridge, a parent at the Houston Sudbury School who submitted the idea for this episode via email. Thanks, Luz, and I hope you enjoyed the result. Show notes for this episode, featuring pictures and other bonus content, are available at www.alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP16 for episode 16. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Miss Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again soon with more stories of real learning for real life.